All right, well, one of the discoveries from the Pandora papers is that some states in the U.S. turned into havens for trusts.
Yeah, South Dakota actually takes the lead with 81 trusts, followed by Florida, Delaware, and Nevada. Business journalist Mark Stewart joins us. He dug deeper into the details of the documents. Fascinating stuff here. This was a global effort, as you can see. How much planning and effort had to be put into compile all this report?
Good to see you, Dave. This was a Herculean task. You know, usually when you report a business story, you depend on public documents, things like property records. But when it comes to things such as finance, tax records, in this case, they are most of the time, a majority of the time, sealed. So this was a very big effort in the sense that these reporters from this international consortium were able to develop trust with their sources, who then released this information and allowed for this to be reported. That in itself is a huge task, but also we are looking at documents that were dating back to the 1970s, different currencies, different financial systems. So this was a really lofty project and certainly is creating some conversation now.
Now, I mentioned earlier where we saw a map and we saw the different pictures and names and what countries they were from. Vladimir Putin was one, Shakira, Elton John was another one, obviously names that we can recognize. But what does this mean for the people in the states named in this report?
Sure, I think a lot of people are asking that question this morning. At the end of the day, despite the headlines, despite the big names, what happened here is really not that big of a surprise. This is something that wealthy people, people who have, affluent people have been doing for years, looking for new ways and new places to store their money. I was talking to someone last night who does a lot of work with international finance and economics, and he brought up the point to me that while this is not illegal, it certainly raises some moral questions. And so that is something that will certainly be played out. It's also interesting to note that in some cases, putting your money offshore, there are legitimate business reasons to do that. In some parts of the world, the banks, the governments just can't be trusted with your money. So many of these individuals who in these cases are extremely wealthy want some protection, and so they will go elsewhere. But obviously, this story is raising a lot of questions, specifically along the moral and ethical lines.
Definitely, and that's such a good point that you make, that it's not necessarily a surprise that this is happening, because I can see, viewers at home saying, ha, I knew it, and that's something that we already knew. But how in this situation do you hold people and banks accountable? I mean, is anything going to change? Because as you mentioned, they're constantly looking for places and ways to hide their money.
Yeah, and I think as Bianca mentioned, this is prompting this big global discussion about inequality and the gap between rich and poor people. And that, I think, is where this conversation will start and perhaps lead to some policy change. We were talking earlier about the Panama Papers, a very similar story to a smaller scale, but in some cases there, in Malta, for example, a government official there was investigated. In some places, such as Denmark, for example, there's been a push to tighten the laws. And even in the United States, just recently, there is a whole anti-money laundering effort underway. A U.S. representative mentioned about it just yesterday. So I think that's where this is going to start, this discussion about inequality. And there's going to be a lot of pressure, not just from politicians, but also from outside groups. When the Pandora Papers was released, the humanitarian group Oxfam International, raised questions. This is money, tax money, that could have been used to help build hospitals. It could have been used to help deal with climate change. So while there's certainly going to be a lot of regulatory discussion, I think there's also going to be a broader discussion just about where we as society stand with all of this.
Definitely, and Mark, I think that another good point that Bianca made just a minute ago, during this recovery effort from the pandemic, I mean, we're all watching this as almost like kind of like another dagger to that recovery process. But one thing that I want to ask too is when it comes to South Dakota and Delaware, I mean, those are just states that you wouldn't really suspect. So how much did those states know, and were the politicians even aware of the impact of their own legislation?
Well, in the case of South Dakota, I mean, I think that these rules were passed a long, long time ago. And I was looking this morning to see if any of the lawmakers or the governor had anything to say. And from what I've been able to discover so far, no responses. But I think it's important to note that states all across the country are doing things to try to attract business and investment. Obviously, South Dakota is getting headlines here, but a real textbook example, as you mentioned, is Delaware. There are more Fortune 500 companies there than any other state in the country. I mean, I think about 60% of Fortune 500 companies are registered in Delaware, and that's because it's really a conducive business environment with little regulation and little taxes for business. And so if you're a company trying to find a place to set up shop, that's a natural go-to, a natural go-to location. In addition, in Delaware, for example, if we're talking about the complexities of the laws, you can be registered there, but you can have your headquarters somewhere else. So states are very aware of what they are doing. It's something that they have to do to be competitive with each other. In this case, it's revealing perhaps some flaws to the system.
Definitely. All right. Thank you, Mark Stewart, for your insights.